I just recently put out a video showing 2 environment design projects that I completed. Today, I want to talk about the design process and strategies for time management and overcoming resistance. Meanwhile, I'm going to be playing a time lapse of the design process in the background. But first, I want to talk about where I failed on this project. My initial goal was to create this sci-fi game environment inside of an engine such as Unreal or Unity. This would mean modeling the assets in Blender, texturing them in Substance Painter, and then importing into my engine of choice. But I soon found that my skills were still severely lacking when it came to navigating inside engines such as Unreal and Unity, and that watching simple breakdowns and time lapses of people creating similar environments was not translating into the same results for myself. Now, this is where I want to start talking about resistance. I could have been discouraged at this point because I wasn't able to move forward with my project the way I originally intended. Instead, I quickly made 2 adjustments to rectify these issues. One, I decided to create the renders and the walkthrough that I wanted to make in Blender Eevee for now. Now, this was mainly because I have a much more thorough understanding of Blender, and I knew I was able to create something that looked visually appealing. I also made it a point to seek out better learning material and educational content regarding game engines, since this is still a skill that I need to learn. I didn't give up on learning how to work with game engines. In fact, I'm more focused now on learning environment art than I was when I initially started the project. However, I still didn't let this project fall by the wayside, since I had still learned a considerable amount of skills regarding modeling, texturing, and lighting in particular. Having a complete project that's not perfect, but still complete, is better than not having a project at all. So when facing this sort of resistance, I have found it best to break it down to a simple formulaic process. And with this project, it went a little something like this. Can I create something that demonstrates a professional mastery of the fundamentals and the tools of the craft that I am learning? No. Okay, then can I create something that shows continued technical growth and advancement from where I was before? Yes. And that was good enough. For now. This is where I'd like to mention Steven Pressfield's The War of Art, which is where a lot of this is coming from. Inspiration to It's also touched on this in his video, The Reason Why You Are Not a Successful Artist, which covered the resistance that commonly constitutes what we refer to as artist block, and how it detracts artists from being successful and reaching their goals. Now, I think one of the best abilities for artists to learn in overcoming artist block is the ability to identify their resistance in completing a task faster. The faster you can identify where resistance is coming from, the faster you can formulate your own solution. This may include a lack of skills in a certain area, a resistance to learning a tool such as a new software, or a deficiency in your ability to manage your time when it comes to completing a given project. It is important to remember that resistance is often an internal issue, and while we often blame external circumstances for a large percentage of these, it is entirely within our capabilities to change these or work around them. For myself, I could say that both of these environment designs were completed over the period of 2 separate weekends. Now, that does not count for the time that was spent planning and the resources and skills that were gained beforehand, but it covers the face-to-screen time that went into creating them. So in one self-contained weekend, I modeled the simple assets for the Diamond Corridor, textured them in Substance Painter, imported them into Unreal, played around with them for a while until I realized that I wasn't yet able to achieve the results I was going for, and then went back to Blender and compiled the scenes for the final render you see here. And I was done. So, what can you do to identify where your resistance is coming from? One method that has worked for me is to better track my work. This means keeping track of how much I accomplish and how long it takes me. There are several different ways to do this, and it often includes tracking your hours in progress. For one, I will work in iterations of 1.5 hours to 2 hours before I take a break. This allows me to continually refresh myself and come back to my project with fresh eyes. I also often do incremental saves on my project. which in addition to letting me fall back to an earlier stage if I severely mess something up, it allows me to see the progression I make between each increment. Another method that I've found useful recently is that I've started journaling my progress. This doesn't have to be anything fancy. In fact, I only write a simple entry every day that briefly details what I accomplished, what I learned, and what I am still having troubles with. I find this is one of the best ways to figure out what I need to be working on and identify if I have any particular resistance to completing a certain task. The next thing you can focus on is coming up with solutions to your resistance. As with my previous example, I find it best to keep these simple and formulaic. For example, you have a project and something isn't working. Maybe you need to research a new solution, which will cost you a lot of time. Or the solution you've come up with is really costful to the rest of your workflow, such as your computing power. You could bite the bullet or try to find another solution. Or you can just throw it out. Now, this might sound grossly counterintuitive, but it can help to quickly question the necessity of a task before you go ahead with the time investment and commitment. But this is just one example. Overall, your ability to quickly diagnose resistance will allow you to have a faster turnaround from start to finish, from one project to the next. And you can just accept that you will be constantly facing new forms of resistance on each project that you take on. Now, you've probably heard people say, fail faster. This is essentially true, and it's crucial to make sure that you are learning from your failures. Creating projects that are finished but not perfect show that you are challenging your artistic abilities to become better. Now, time management is another area where creatives notoriously face a lot of resistance. You may feel like you don't have the time to complete the projects you want, but just remember, Rome wasn't built in a day. Regardless of your schedule, you probably won't be making great strides on your creative projects if you are not adequately budgeting your time. If you have a goal to work towards, you can break down your project into smaller tasks. I have often found that if I am facing resistance on one task for an extended period of time, it can be helpful to have an alternative task to work on that can also constructively contribute towards my end goal. Likewise, I will also be sure to journal the tasks that I was having difficulty with, and what I did with my time instead. This gives me a reminder to reapproach the task I was struggling with at a later time. It's also very important that I budget how much time I spend on each step of my project. This is due to Parkinson's law, which states that the work expands to fill the time available. If you do not give yourself an allotment of time to complete a task, then you will likely just keep working on that task regardless of whether you are being productive. Going back to my own work, I could have spent far more time at any stage of the process. The 3D modeling is simplistic. I start with a shape profile, hence diamond corridor and hourglass corridor. I then dress it with some simple geometric forms and create areas of rest and detail simply using only bevels, extrusions, and arrays of objects. Next, the texturing is simplistic. I added some normal details, then I choose 2 or 3 colors for the basis of my materials. I then add some metal edgeware, dirt, and roughness breakup to everything. Texturing done. Next is the lighting and presentation. After I've already gone through my endeavor to try and set up my scene in a game engine and failed, I go back to Blender. Now the lighting and presentation is where I want my work to shine. So I start with the lights off and think about how I want to draw the viewer's eyes into the environment. Giving the lights a flicker or other animations really helps to give a flat, uninteresting environment a sense of life, while keeping lights dim and dark in other areas helps to obscure details and make the environment more foreboding. Now, another useful skill for overcoming resistance is to learn to work with distractions. There are many creative people who idolize having the time to work on their projects without any distractions in a state of reclusive isolation. Now, this might be easier for some people now given the present situation, but I would recommend learning to work with greater distraction. For one, if you are only budgeting time for when you can work without distraction, then your time budget might be rather short. But if you budget your time to work when distractions and noise will be present, then you will find that you might have a lot more time than you expected to work on your projects throughout the day. Just like a regular work environment, you're going to have a lot of background noise and things that can distract you. And if you can work productively in this environment, then you can advance a lot faster. The same can work for your creative projects. Personally, I prefer to have background noise of a home or a work environment as opposed to working in isolation now. This is because it's a resistance that I have overcome, and I am now more productive because of it. Now, I would like to hear from you. What has helped you overcome resistance in the past, and what resistance do you still struggle with? So feel free to leave a comment below if you found this video interesting, and consider subscribing and hitting the bell icon to receive notifications when I post another video. Otherwise, stay busy, get those projects done, and I'll see you in the next video.